Hello, everyone. This is another half episode, which will probably end up being in another hour. I have fallen far behind on the Codex again because I get so swept away in the story and I'm so immersed that I see the pop ups of all this new information and I just totally forget. So here we go. Here's your nice little audiobook of the Codex. Arma Diaboli. The Second Lateran Council, 1139, forbade priests from wearing luxurious clothing, nuns from singing alongside monks, and good Christians from using crossbows against other Christians and Catholics. The crossbow was dubbed a diabolical weapon, in Latin arma diaboli, because it could easily pierce even the strongest armor of the time, and, unlike the bow, a hit from it almost guaranteed death. However, the crossbow continued to be used and improved. The original wooden limbs were gradually replaced by stronger and stiffer composite limbs, and eventually by steel. Along with these developments came the introduction of several new drawing mechanisms ranging from human arm power to levers and windlasses. Even the strongest crossbow, however, could not pierce high-quality steel breastplates, and ultimately, the title of the most lethal weapon passed to firearms. Chivalric orders. The first knightly orders emerged at the end of the 11th century, primarily in connection with the Crusades. They were a combination of religious order and military organization, appealing to Christian values as well as chivalric traditions and service to society. Besides noble knights, the members of the order also include a large number of common people, foot soldiers, archers, sailors, and auxiliary military professions. Becoming a member of a knightly order might have seemed like a suitable career choice for a young medieval man, but often the opposite was true. Life was subject to strict rules and organization, often requiring celibacy, life in a closed convent, or long fasts. For example, the Templars forbade paying ransom for their members, so falling into enemy hands meant only imprisonment or death. In the High Middle Ages of the 13th and 14th centuries, the orders experienced their greatest expansion, with their armies numbering tens of thousands of fighters, and in some cases they even founded their own states, such as in the Baltic region or later in Malta. In more recent history, the religious and ecclesiastical context has faded, and the orders have focused more on charity. The most famous knightly order is the Templars, followed by the Order of St. John, Order of the Knights of Malta, the Teutonic Order, the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Knights of St. Lazarus. Chronicles. Since ancient times, educated members of the court or clergy dedicated themselves to writing chronicles, i.e., literary works describing contemporary events, the lives of rulers, great battles, and sometimes everyday life. These records were kept chronologically, and beyond the mere dates, they provide a rich source of period information. Chronicles are one of the best sources for studying and reconstructing the history of a country, notable figures, places, buildings, and general realities of the time. There are different types of chronicles: world, national, episcopal, monastic, royal, dynastic, provincial, tracking genealogy, urban, biographical, or autobiographical, travel journals, and more. Among the most significant Czech chronicles are those of Cosmas and Dalimil, the canon of Vyšehrad, the writings of the Sasau monk, and the Zbraslav chronicle. The chroniclers generally enjoyed the most favorable conditions. Most lived at courts, had free access to old written records and court life, and ample time devoted solely to writing. Although chronicles are the most valuable historic sources, it is important to consider the historical ideological subtext when reading and reconstructing them. For example, Cosmas wrote his chronicle with unabashed sympathy for the Přemyslid dynasty, while Dalimil showed great antipathy against the Germans. Both occasionally mixed facts with myths and legends, e.g. the beginning of Czech history with the buildings of the Tower of Babel. Some of the books to be found in the game are transliterations of chapters from Cosmas or Dalimil, e.g. the account of forefather Che, or the Maiden's War, and others. I apologize already, I'm going to butcher Czech words, okay? Damascus steel. Damascus steel, also known as damask, damascene, or damask steel, is a high-quality metal alloy produced since the early Middle Ages in Syria, Indonesia, and Central Asia. It was imported into Europe from the Syrian city of Damascus and was used by the Franks, Vikings, and Spaniards. However, this steel was not accessible to everyone as its price was very high. Damascus steel is renowned for its distinctive composition and processing, which creates alternating layers of metal. Each item thus acquired characteristic patterns known as marbling, which are entirely unique. This unique composition gave the steel exceptional properties, particularly very high hardness and durability compared to ordinary steel. For this reason, the complex and costly production of the steel was strictly guarded as a secret. Some, of course, attempted to replicate it, creating so-called welded false Damascus from low-quality materials, which resembled the real thing in appearance, but was nowhere near its equal in terms of properties. Gourds or hill forts, sometimes called burg walls, were fortified settlements of various sizes established from the Neolithic period right through to the early Middle Ages. They were built using natural terrain or the protection of waterways on islands or hills. Within the outer walls, there would typically be a central fort. These strongholds were mostly built from timber, with an outer palisade, stockade, and a ditch or moat. The stronghold fulfilled a protective and strategic function in times of war and also served as a stopover on trade routes or as a goods transfer station. Semine Hill Fort. Not far from the Semine Fortress is the largest documented Celtic gourd in the Czech lands. The hardly accessible site in the middle of the forest and rocks above the confluence of rivers ideally fulfilled the conditions for strategic settlement. The Celts probably built an oppidum here, an early medieval form of fortified settlement, or a refugium, a temporary refuge during wars. According to research, the fortress had 3 ramparts and moats in addition to natural fortifications. Inside, pottery from the Latin period and remains of masonry made of black basalt, which was also used as at Trotsky Castle, were found. This suggests that the hill forts may have been surrounded by a stone wall. According to some hypotheses, the Celts also had a sacred place here, as during the solar equinox, the sunset can be seen from the top of Semine Hill between the rocks on which Trotsky Castle stands. Since 2018, a reconstruction of the hill fort has been standing on the site, where it is possible to learn about the history of Bohemian paradise. Healing herbs. Herbs played an important role not only in medieval cuisine, but also formed the basis of herbal medicine. Knowledge about them spread either through an oral tradition, herbalists in rural areas, or among monks and scholars from ancient texts. Many herbs could be administered as teas, decoctions, long cooking, infusions, steeping in hot water, extracts, cold maceration, tinctures, soaking in alcohol, steeped in vinegar, juice, or concentrates for gargling. Adding honey or sugar did not enhance the effectiveness of the herbal products, but it improved their taste. In addition to internal use, herbs were applied in the form of creams, ointments, compresses, or oils. Dissolved in water, sometimes it was recommended to sleep on pillows filled with dried plants. It was believed, especially in rural areas, that the properties of herbs were influenced by the time and occasionally of their harvesting, e.g. in Midsummer's Eve at midnight, etc., and the use of special incantations. Municipal finances. Towns and cities always had to look after their budgets, so they collected taxes, customs, duties, tolls, and ungilt goods, tariffs. The most common form of tax was paid twice a year in an amount dependent on the asset of each respective citizen. Fees and taxes were levied on the economic activities, sales of goods or services provided by the city's inhabitants. Another source of civic revenue was money made by the city council or the city court for making of contracts, documents, records, and other routine activities. The treasury also collected money from interest payments, fines, building funds, loans, and various rents and fuel duties. Written records were maintained of all revenues. The city council allocated funds for the purchase of real estate, paid the nobility for defense and security, invested in schools, civic cultural developments, churches, administration, salaries of city officials, construction, operation, and maintenance of municipal buildings. Safe conduct. A safe conduct pass was a document issued by a member of the highest social class to ensure the holder's safety. Most often, it provided protection in a specific territory during a journey, and sometimes the holder was given an escort along with the Safe Conduct Pass. For example, Jan Hus received a Safe Conduct Pass from Sigismund of Luxembourg when he traveled to the Council of Constance. He indeed survived the journey to the council, but it did not save him from death in the flames after the ecclesiastical trial. Tithes. A tithe was a compulsory tax, levied since ancient times. It was paid to the parish priest or other religious institutions. The term comes from Old English and means an amount of 1/10 of the value of the harvest. The inhabitants of monastery estates had the misfortune to be taxed twice by the church, once in the form of a tithe, the second time as a mandatory levy for the occupation of church land. Childbirth and obstetrics. In our time, unfortunately, obstetrics and childcare was a very underdeveloped field. Educated doctors did not want to take it up, and education was not accessible to women. So, as a result, obstetrics became more of a specialty for spinsters and midwives. Childbirth was done sitting up or on a special chair. The so-called cesarean section was only used in extreme cases when the life of the mother could not be saved anyway, or the life of the child was more precious. Given the poor sanitary conditions or inadequate diet and the inability to breastfeed, infant mortality rates in the population was as high as 80%. Childbirth was often dangerous for the mother herself due to the inability to deal with most complications. A well-built and healthy woman spent most of her reproductive years either pregnant or breastfeeding. 8 or even 12 children, few of whom lived to adulthood, were no exception. It was not until the Renaissance when the process of the birth of a new life finally came into view of medicine that the approach to childbirth and obstetrics changed in part. Farmer. In medieval times, about 90% of the population lived in villages, most of whom were engaged in agriculture and animal husbandry. Although peasants were free and had owned their farms from time immemorial, the land beneath them was only leased from the sovereign or, respectively, from the nobleman who had received it as a fief from the king. For the lease of the land, they had to pay part of their annual yields, whether in money, honey, grain, or other crops. Sometimes they were also required to perform cove labor for the lord, that is, to work without pay on the fields belonging to the feudal noble. The land dates in the 15th and 16th centuries voted that the village folk were not allowed to carry weapons or practice hunting. With the special permission of the lord, the peasants were allowed to hunt hares or small birds. Feudalism. Feudalism is a political system based on land ownership that emerged in the early Middle Ages following the decline of the Roman Empire. Its foundation was the fiefdom, a certain area, territory or land, that an owner would grant to others. The ruler, either secular or ecclesiastical, was the feudal liege suzerain, and those afforded his fiefdoms were his liege subjects or vassals. The handover itself came with pomp and ceremony, during which the vassal promised allegiance and military aid or other services to his feudal lord. The contract could only be annulled by the death of one of the parties or by a severe breach of the agreement. Not only could the liege have several vassals, a vassal could also serve several liege lords. In the event of war, the vassal had to choose one side according to the feudal contract. Feudalism also determined the conditions of the poorest class. The serfs who worked on the leased land paid taxes from it and supported their master, his soldiers and officials, or a monastery. It was called a feudal rent, a source of wealth, mainly for the nobility. Portions of the fiefs were subleased to the king's vassals, in turn became the liege lord of his own vassals. Horse riding. In the Middle Ages, horses were distinguished more by their use than by their breed. Sturdy war horses or knights, destriers, were complemented by more agile palfreys, favored by the nobility. For the less wealthy classes, there were versatile horses called ronces. Various types of draft horses could be seen in fields, caravans, or mine travails. The most important part of the equipment was the saddle. It was characterized by a seat made from a single piece of wood, usually without any padding. However, riding on it was surprisingly comfortable. This was aided not only by the wide cut of the sides of the saddle for better contact with the horse's flanks, but also by the raised front and especially the back pommel, which served as a backrest. To control the horse, a bridle was used, consisting of a bit, most commonly a snaffle, later of the curb type, and reins. Spurs also had significant riding as well as social importance. Common accessories for knightly or noble horses included decorated harnesses and breastplates. War horses could be seen with metal chamfrons, protecting their heads during tournaments or battles. Horses were dressed in caparisons or various cuts, colors, and heraldry. The most widespread was the caparison covering the entire body of the horse, or the so-called croupier or crupper, which protected only the horse's back and hindquarters. A medieval rider expected his time on horseback to be comfortable and safe. The design of the saddle directly defined his seat. The rider was more upright and leaning back, transferring weight to his legs. The supports firmly held him in the saddle and protected him from the attacks from the ground. However, being firmly locked in the saddle also had its disadvantages. Jumping on a horse was almost impossible, and dismounting quickly was also difficult. It was not uncommon for many injuries or deaths to be caused more by the saddle itself than by falling from the horse. Nomads, a collective term for individuals who did not settle in one place and changed their location depending on livelihood, season, security situation, or horse displacement. Due to their nomadic lifestyle and foreign customs, they were often viewed with distance or became targets of discrimination and prejudice. In the major society of Czech lands, the term gypsies became established for nomads, although later it turned into a pejorative term, even though originally it simply referred to a non-settled person and did not primarily refer to any specific ethnicity. In our game, the Nomads Camp is a mixture of people of various nationalities and destinations brought together by their journey. Romani people. Based on linguistic analysis of the Romani language, we know that their origin comes from India. However, why migration to the west occurred between the 5th and 10th centuries AD can only be speculated upon. In the early 15th century, several groups of nomadic Roma, numbering from dozens to hundreds of people, may already have been moving across Czech lands. Records indicate that they presented themselves as Christian refugees expelled from the Holy Lands after the conquest by the Arabs. This initially portrayal earned them respect, and many rulers and sovereigns provided them with passes ensuring free passage and protection. However, along with their migration into continental Europe, cultural misunderstandings and conflicts began to arise. The Roma, with their exotic cultural practices and attire, often faced incomprehension. Despite the difficult coexistence, the Roma tried to survive as best they could. They were renowned horsemen, blacksmiths, and musicians, and their supposed ability to control the supernatural is often mentioned. The latter, however, is more likely an attribute to our tendency to attribute unknown things to an otherworldly origin. Witchcraft. In Czech lands, any practices connected with magic that were intended to harm rather than help, especially by women, were regarded as witchcraft. In the early Middle Ages, witchcraft was divided into white magic, beneficial and associated with healing, and black magic, curses, hexes, and abusive magic for iniquitous purposes. Magic included divination, necromancy, alchemy, herbalism, and entrenched pagan customs and rituals, which had originally constituted an integral part of medieval society. By the end of the 15th century, efforts to eradicate witchcraft culminated in senseless witch hunts and persecution of anyone involved with magic. The persecutions peaked around the end of the 16th century, when hundreds of people fell victim to the zeal of the witch hunters. As well as the Inquisition, many superstitions and half-truths have arisen concerning witchcraft, though only a few are grounded in truth. Although many were convicted and condemned during the period, most of those accused of heresy or witchcraft escaped unscathed. On the contrary, it was often those who had denounced them with covetous intent and those accusations proved to be false who were punished. More people fell prey to lynch mobs and fanatical self-proclaimed inquisitors than to institutionalized witch burnings. Women in the Middle Ages. In the medieval patriarchal society, the male was the head of the family, and a woman's role was defined by her relationship to him: daughter, sister, wife, mother, or widow. Girls had a short childhood, reaching adulthood between ages of 12 and 15, according to municipal documents, while boys reached adulthood at 15 years old. Women were primarily expected to take care of the household, home, and family, while men spent most of their time engaged in crafts or trade. Only a widow could obtain permission to run a business or practice a craft with the help of journeymen. For wealthier women, domestic activities included mainly embroidery, cleaning, childcare, shopping, or teaching musical instruments. In the countryside, women worked in fields or pastures, engaged in beekeeping, weaving, spinning, food preparation, knitting, or sewing. Women were also employed in some professions such as midwives, servants, innkeepers, bathhouse attendants, or money lenders. Women rarely left their homes unnecessarily. The rules for outings were defined by relevant social class, while townswomen and noblewomen could move outside the home only accompanied by their husbands or servants. The wives of craftsmen, traders, and farmers could go out alone. The ideal of beauty in the Middle Ages was a thin, pale woman with long blonde hair, small round breasts, not too wide hips, and a narrow waist, with an emphasis on health and fertility. Pregnancy was very common from the onset of sexual maturity in women. Births were complicated and subsequent care inadequate, making the risk of death during childbirth high. Miscarriages were also frequent. Unmarried daughters of single mothers brought disgrace to their families and were even marginalized in society. Girls did not inherit trades. Parents had to accumulate a dowry and pay it to the groom. Burglars and robbers. Thievery and banditry were dishonorable professions, whose practitioners were often known in the wider area, that is, if they could evade justice long enough. Petty theft most often happened in villages, town markets, or taverns, in short, where thieves could hide in the crowd. But people were in greater danger in the open countryside, outside their settlements or in remote villages, where victims could rarely call for help. Bandits, therefore, often threatened merchants and travelers on the road, especially around the richer towns, where they flocked to do business. Some band of robbers were organized and operated under the auspices of rebellious nobles who profited from their actions. At times, they even resorted to raiding entire villages or towns. They would then sell off their loot in market or taverns. The execution book gives us evidence of the fate of those who became involved with bandits. In one of them, we read about Jan Ziska that he steals herrings and killed a hired hand of the Rosenbergs. Woodcutter. In the early Middle Ages, agriculture and the rapid growth of towns required extensive deforestation. Reforestation was not yet being done, so by the 15th century, some areas had even fewer forests than today, and the region around towns were completely devastated. Logging was done by woodcutters. The primary tool was a large single-sided axe on a long handle or haft, while various wooden wedges and hammers were used to split the lumber. Transport of lumber from distant areas was difficult, which led to using navigable waterways down which the lumber was left to drift freely. Apollonia. A local legend says that Apollonia was the daughter of a wealthy landowner who fell in love with a poor boy. Her father was against it, so he arranged for her beloved to be conscripted into the army for 7 years, where he lost his life. When Apollonia learned of this, she went mad with grief and left for parts unknown. Her mother later found her sick and emaciated in a cave in a rock town, which the girl now called home. The girl refused to come home and died in her arms. This is not a town in a true sense of the word, but a complex system of sandstone rock formations near the Trotsky Castle and the village of Troskowitz. Many paths wind through the rocks with caves underneath them that historically provided refuge for outcasts and exiles as well as villagers seeking shelter from approaching armies. Due to severe erosion of the weathered sandstone, public access has now been completely restricted, and the site has become a protected nature reserve. Visitors can, however, visit other very similar rock towns that are peppered throughout the so-called Bohemian Paradise. Ponds of the Trotsky region. Today, there is a system of several ponds around the Trotsky Castle. Although they were built in the 16th century, we decided to leave them in place because of the amazing views that their surroundings offer. The largest of the ponds is the Rock Tower Pond, which covers an area of 9 hectares. The others are Vidlak, Rokitnak, Preshak, Krudka, and Lower Pond. In the Middle Ages, Nebakov Fortress stood near Nebakov Pond. The area is now a nature reserve called Podtroseka Valley. It is the largest complex of wetland habitats in the Bohemian Paradise region, and it's home to many species of strictly protected organisms. If you ever decide to visit Trotsky Castle, we recommend you stop by this nearby locality as well. Semien. Semien is a small village lying to the west of Troskovitz. In early times, it included a fortress that no longer exists today, which, according to surviving records, belonged to Jan and Oldrich of Semien in the year 1365. These two brothers and later their children owned the fortress until 1416, but did not reside there much because they chose other places for their seats. In 1375, Oldrich's son, Jan, therefore assumed administration of Semien, and after him it passed to his sons, Peter and Privik. Whether these Semien men were ancestors or relatives of Semien or Semien line, an old Bohemian minor noble family, unfortunately can no longer be definitively proven or disproven. So far, the only discovery is that the first to bear their name was Jakob, the younger Semien of Semien, as late as 1422. Even so, we decided to present the owner of the Semien fortress in our game as a representative example of impoverished nobility dwelling in pleasant. As for the place where the fortress is situated, the terrain bordered by steep rocky slopes, lakes, marshes, and fish ponds became an ideal settlement area as early as the middle of the 1st century BC. Remains of massive ramparts can be found here, the most prominent part being a 10-meter-high frontal rampart with a moat, which archaeological research indicates was built by the Celts. In Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, one also finds the Semien Mill, which belonged to the lords of Semien for centuries, and it remains an important part of the picturesque landscape to this day. That wraps up our Codex catch-up for now. Hopefully I stay on it now, because I feel like we won't get too... Well, maybe I'll see whether we're going to continue these Codex catch-ups intermittently. I'll wait for them to stack up or read them as we go. We'll see. It's so hard to peel myself away from the game when I'm in it, and I'm doing something and something pops up. I don't want to be removed from the present. So maybe I'll do these Codex catch-ups. I'll wait for them to pile up. But yeah, this one is not too long, thank God. Anyways, until the next one, guys, take care.